Good morning, everyone. And my name is Dan Dunning. I'm the House Chair of the Joint Committee on Cannabis Policy. I'm going to call this hearing to order. I'm calling this hearing to order. The Committee on Cannabis Policy is here today for an informational hearing that will include testimony from the Office of the Massachusetts Inspector General. We will also accept written testimony from the public, which can be submitted to the committee using instructions on the hearing webpage, which can be found at maledge.gov. We're holding this hearing to receive testimony from the Inspector General on the operational and structural concerns at the Cannabis Control Commission, raised in his letter addressed to legislators on June 18th, titled Cannabis Control Commission, Appoint Receiver for Day-to-Day Operations Before Legislative Term Ends July 31st, and subsequently revise statutory governance structure. This letter covers a lot of ground, but we're especially interested in learning more about the basis for the urgency of the recommendation that the Commission be entered into receivership. The legislature in this committee has revisited enabling legislation in previous sessions and has this session continued to review the many challenges in the cannabis industry and at the CCC, advancing and even extending bills for our review. This letter, though its timing may have been surprising, is not a shock and echoes concerns that we have heard from other avenues. After reviewing your June 18th letter, the committee, with session coming to its final weeks, believed it was incumbent upon us to ensure a public process to hear directly from yourself and your office. What we're expecting today is a discussion on the basis of your investigation and the facts and observations that thus propelled you to your conclusion that dramatic step of receivership should be considered. The committee is interested solely in this testimony and how it pertains to enabling statutes and legislation, not in personnel or other matters. Understanding your investigation is ongoing, and that it is the sole purview of the legislature to consider any structural changes at the CCC, your testimony will be a continued part of our committee deliberations. Before we begin, I just want to introduce the members of the committee that have joined me today, starting first to my left, which is our Vice Chair, Representative Consalvo, Representative Howard from Lowell, and starting at the far right, we have Representative Sauter from Uxbridge, Representative Berthium from Barry, Representative Saunders from Belchertown, Representative Shand from Newburyport, and joining us virtually, I believe we have Representative Gary from Dracut. Before we begin, just a quick note to the committee members. We're going to have the Inspector General testify. We'll hold all questions until his testimony is concluded. And then we'll be able to ask questions from there forward. I'll facilitate some of the questioning. So, Mr. Shapiro, we'll ask you to submit your testimony to the committee now. Thank you.
Good morning and thank you. In a housekeeping matter, I just wanted to share that we have provided a copy of my testimony as well as a chart that we think helps illustrate some of the root concerns that we have with regard to the statute. That's been available to those that are here. We've made it available electronically as a PDF for Representative Geary and others that may be participating remotely. I want to also share that we expect to provide an update to that later today that we will give to you for the members that will link all of the material that we refer to, so that will make it easier for all of you, understanding that it is certainly late in the session. We wanted to make it as easy for you to ultimately get to the primary material and other items that I reference in the testimony. So I just wanted you to know as a housekeeping matter that would be coming, but you do have the material and we reference all of it.
Perfect, thank you. I think all the committee members have received the material, so thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Donahue, Vice Chair Consalvo, Ranking Member Representative Bartholomew, and House members of the committee, good day. Chairman Donahue, I want to thank you for your leadership in convening this hearing on short notice, late in the formal session, based in part on my letter of June 18th, 2024. In that letter, I recommended that the legislature take immediate action to provide clarity and direction for the daily operations of the Cannabis Control Commission to help protect this emerging industry by creating a mechanism for the appointment of a receiver to manage the day-to-day operations of the Commission. Today, I would like to address why I made this recommendation, why I made it now, and what next steps may look like. I will give you a brief overview and then discuss each of those questions in more detail. The Cannabis Commission has exhibited many symptoms. Its self-help remedies have not worked, and it is now time for a diagnosis and treatment plan to take effect. Please allow me to explain. First, why I made this recommendation. As I explained in my letter, the Commission's enabling statute, Chapter 55 of the Acts of 2017, specifically section codified in Section 76 of Chapter 10, assigns the same authority to two positions, the chair and the executive director. And the chart that I provided, I think, helps illustrate that. I believe that this language is at the root of all the problems we have seen at the Commission. Second, I have recommended that the legislature appoint a receiver now because the Commission itself cannot fix this problem, and with the passage of time, the issues are only growing. Third, a receiver is only a temporary measure while the legislature revisits the statute to refine the language to ensure that the leadership at the Commission has clear direction to carry out its mission. Because the current session is coming to a close, the legislature can address this issue in a timely manner by appointing a receiver while it thoughtfully considers amending the statute. Going back to why I made this recommendation, while the agency I lead is more widely known for its fraud investigations, make no mistake about it, we are equally concerned about the mitigation of and elimination of waste of public funds and resources. Waste is like a leaky faucet. You don't really know about the amount of water that has gone down the drain until you receive the water bill, and then it's too late. The water and the money are wasted. The OIG's broad authority and context for the OIG's review of the Cannabis Commission. As Inspector General, my mandate under Chapter 12A is to act to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse in the expenditure of public funds. Further, to carry out this mandate, Chapter 12A instructs the Inspector General to review legislation and regulations relating to programs and operations described in said Section 7 and shall make recommendations concerning the effect of such legislation or regulations on the prevention and detection of fraud, waste, and abuse. And the Inspector General may recommend policies which assist in the prevention or detection of fraud, waste, and abuse. Matters come to the attention of the OIG for investigation from complaints or tips by telephone hotlines, email, snail mail, walk-ins, the OIG complaint portal, whistleblower contacts, as well as the OIG's proactive review of matters reported in the media, the use of data analytics and studies, and other means. While I can state that concerns about the Cannabis Commission come to the OIG from many of these vehicles, I am not at liberty to share at this time whether or what additional CC matters may be under investigation. I can say, however, as I have indicated in my public letter of June 18th, that concerns about governance at the Cannabis Commission have been a significant area of review for the OIG. While it is not the practice of the OIG to release its investigative materials, the Cannabis Commission's acting chair released communications between the OIG and the Commission on June 20th of 2024. These communications show that the OIG work dates back well before January and February of 2024 dates of those letters. In her June 20th letter, she both claimed that the Commission had cooperated with the OIG's investigation and also challenged the OIG's authority at the same time. And in an interview with the Boston Herald, she stated, and I quote, "Just understand that we get the job done," unquote. The OIG vehemently disagrees with her opinion of our authority, her characterization of cooperation, or that her agency is able to operate without oversight and is beyond reproach. Members of this body would disagree as well, as demonstrated by prior concerns raised to this committee by many legislators, most clearly in a letter sent to the chairs on September 8th of 2023 by Senators Moore, Brady, Tarr, and Representatives Berthamew and Sauter about concerns at the CCC. The immediate problems about governance and leadership. Turning to the substantive matters, I must acknowledge that the Cannabis Commission does issue licenses, promulgates regulations, and takes enforcement actions. It has done so while enduring previously unseen levels of leadership challenges during its short history. Since 2017, it has experienced an unusually high level of turnover and publicly aired disagreements that I would suggest impedes its ability to focus and fully meet its potential to become a mature and fully functional state agency. I understand that building an agency and an industry from the ground up is complicated, but the issues we are seeing are beyond what one would expect. Even accounting for the initial startup issues for a new commission, its dysfunction, unlike anything we have seen before. We only need to look back on the earlier years of the Health Policy Commission, the Peace Officers Standards and Training Commission, or the Gaming Commission to see that. While each of these commissions experienced some degree of growing pain, none were on par or even close to what we are seeing at the Cannabis Commission. The OIG has received complaints about the length of time the commission takes to process registration applications, conduct investigations, and complete enforcement actions. While the timing is an administrative action of the department and not something that the OIG would generally investigate, suffice to say, these matters would not take nearly so long if the limited, valuable commission and commissioners' time were not spent with the volume of commission versus agency disputes that are occurring. And as I'll discuss later, one cannot begin to address those complaints when the leadership structure necessary to make corrections is either in flux or uncertain, which in fact limits one of the basic regulatory tools that the OIG uses to have agencies review, resolve, and report back to us. I'd like to give you some examples of governance-related and governance-impacted issues from the past 4 years that led to my recommendation. Chair Hoffman's abrupt resignation. Chair Hoffman abruptly resigned 5 months before his term was set to expire, 6 days after the commission entered a contract for mediation services to help them prepare written governance documents. Why is this significant? Chair Hoffman was the 5th commissioner to resign before the end of their term. Just before his resignation, he made a motion for the commission to engage a mediator to obtain, quote, buy-in, unquote, for all parties to establish a governance structure. Clearly, the issues had been brewing. His motion was made on the heels of an update from himself and Commissioner Concepcion on mediation regarding governance. When he resigned days later, his resignation was not publicly reported until May 9th of 2022, nor was a reason announced. What caused the immediate departure? Has the commission made any progress on governance since this abrupt departure? Certainly not publicly. The suspension of Chair O'Brien and the appointment of an acting chair. When Chair O'Brien was suspended on September 14th of 2023, citing Mass General Law, Chapter 10, Section 76, Commissioner Roy called the September 18th, 2023 meeting to order as the acting chair based on her role as secretary of the commission. During that meeting, after much discussion and debate, the commission appointed Commissioner Concepcion to be acting chair for the next 3 meetings. Further debate occurred in the September 21 meeting. The commission voted to appoint Commissioner Concepcion acting chair until November 9th of 2023. Further debate and another vote occurred at the November 9th meeting, at which the commission ultimately voted to appoint Commissioner Concepcion as acting chair until December 14th of 2023. On December 14th of 2023, acting chair Concepcion was again voted acting chair. Who serves as the chair continues to be an issue. Even when they think they have decided it, it continues to be an issue. My focus is not on who should be the chair or what the basis for such is, but the higher level fact that the question and effort to revote or to reaffirm continues coming up. It isn't about the right answer. It is that it keeps coming up and taking time. Crediting everyone with good faith, it is still being debated because it isn't clear. And while the vote results have generally kept the same acting chair, the results have not always been the same. Yet with 4 active members and 1 commissioner on leave, and thus not voting, a tie keeps the status quo. I recognize that reasonable people can disagree about the legal requirements and interpretation on the issue of who has authority to appoint the acting chair, but the time spent on this process was most certainly wasteful in the sense that a succession hierarchy could have and should have been clearly laid out for the commission. The process took valuable time that the commission could have used on its substantive work of advancing the industry and helping to review license application, review enforcement actions, and much-needed regulations. Death of a Holyoke cannabis worker at True Believe in January of 2022. As you will recall, a Holyoke cannabis worker suffered a tragic death at a facility in January of 22. Such a tragedy should not be an example of governance issues at the Cannabis Commission, but unfortunately it is. Why is that? At the time, the commissioners did not learn about the death until allegedly October of 2022. The executive director knew. He did not share the information with the commissioners. I am not here today to weigh in on who was right and who was wrong. What I can say is that the dispute that followed about who should know what and when shows the significant disconnect with the roles, responsibilities, and who is leading the agency, matters that have not yet been resolved. March 2023, data breach. In March 2023, the Cannabis Commission sent a cannabis blogger by the name of Grant Ellis Smith a spreadsheet containing 17,000 rows of cannabis employee personal data, as well as other confidential information. Why is this noteworthy here and now? This episode illustrates the challenge implementing controls when an agency is at a governance crossroad. The two-driver rule and implementation of regulatory change. To be sure and fair, the Commission has drafted, debated, and implemented substantial body of regulations during its short existence. In September of 2023, the Commission successfully implemented new regulations concerning host community agreements, municipal equity requirements, and suitability reform. Yet, in December of 2023, the Commission voted to eliminate the two-driver rule, which requires marijuana deliveries to be handled by 2 drivers because it adds significant cost to this service. At the May 9th, 2024 Commission meeting, Council indicated that removing the rule is still several months away. Why is this significant in the context of governance issues? The timely adoption of regulations matters to the Commission's consistency. The Commission voted in December to change the rule. One would expect that 7 months later, those who advocated for the rule change would have been able to plan for its implementation and take action. But like other matters, such as licensing, the Commission is reportedly hampered by delays. Rather than spending valuable time obtaining buy-in from all parties, and I note again here that many of those parties have left the Commission to establish governance structure, the Commission could be doing its core mission work. 6, public perception of an agency that is in trouble. I've included in the appendix to my written testimony a collection of news stories, the dysfunction at the CCC stemming from the governance issues. Reality, not perception, is the proper basis for decision-making as I have recommended. That said, the public perception is not off base. Why? Crediting everyone with good faith, the public, and particularly the Commission constituency, can see that the governance issues is a hindrance and one that cannot be resolved short of legislative action. My last example Here, the comptroller's department head signatory authority. My last example here relates to the comptroller department head signatory authority, excuse me. The acting chair recently pointed out in her June 20th, 24 letter that the acting executive director, quote, remains the head of the agency and continues to have department head signatory authority, unquote. That is, she has the authority to sign for the agency on fiscal matters as recognized by the state comptroller. For example, contracts and payroll and the like. The acting chair raised this issue because I had pointed out that the commission had reduced the acting executive director's responsibilities at its June 13th, 2024 meeting. While I appreciate that the commission has ensured that someone has the duties and responsibilities as department head, I would suggest that the commission's actions only muddy the governance waters further. What do I mean by this? Rather than clarifying that the acting executive director's role is, this action further confuses the authority of the executive director, the commission, and the commission chair. Did the legislature intend for the commission to give and take authority and responsibility from the executive director in this manner? That leads me to my next point. What did the legislature intend when it defined the role? Please allow me to explain the problem further. Excuse me. Inherent conflict in the CCC enabling statute. It has much to do with the commissioner's governing statute, which is self-contradictory and provides no clear guidance on who is responsible for leading the agency. I detailed this conflict in my June 18th letter, which I am providing to you today. In short, the relevant language from Chapter 55 of the Acts of 2017, codified in subsection 76H and J of Chapter 10, state that the chair, quote, shall have and exercise supervision and control over all affairs of the commission, and that the executive director, quote, shall be the executive and administrative head of the commission and shall be responsible for administering and enforcing the law relative to the commission and to each administrative unit thereof. Whatever the original intent was for the role of chair and executive director, it is no wonder that conflict has arisen over the respective roles. I believe, based on what we have seen, that this inherent conflict within the statute is the root of the problems plaguing the CCC, though it is not the only issue. Since its inception, or early thereafter, the CCC has been hampered by an inherent ability to effectively discern authority of the chair, the executive director, and the commissioners. This struggle has played out among various leaders at various times since the agency's inception. As I outlined above, this has been an ongoing issue. One does not need to have an ear to the rumor mill or lead an oversight agency to know. These disputes have been publicly reported in the news and captured in the meeting minutes, including in what is not included: no charter and no minutes from the governance meetings. Engaging a mediator to develop governance charter behind closed doors. As I mentioned earlier, in April of 2022, the Commission engaged a mediator to work on governance issues. I do not take issue with the concept of hiring a mediator when necessary, but the circumstances here are both unusual and as concerns my mandate, potentially wasteful. Allow me to please explain. The CCC engaged a mediator to work with, or in Chair Hoffman's words, to get, quote, buy-in from the commissioners, executive director, and staff on governance. What makes this highly unusual is the mediation was started for specific individuals who, for some reason or another, could not get along, but has lasted longer than the employment of several commissioners and professional staff, including those who appear to have sought the mediation. Since the contract was signed, Chair Hoffman has resigned, Chair O'Brien was appointed and suspended, first Commissioner Roy and then Commissioner Concepcion were appointed or voted acting chair, Executive Director Collins left, Chief People Officer Deborah Hilton Creek was named Acting Executive Director, and Chief Communications Officer Sinclair and Director of Human Resources Trader were suspended. And most recently, Acting Executive Director Hilton Creek had certain responsibilities reassigned. This list does not even include the other staff member turnover. I share this to suggest that the initial parties that may have been party to the mediation, whomever they may have been, likely do not even work at the agency. So why has this continued? Is this the type of dispute and inability to work together a baseline for the CCC, or does it have its roots in something else? The Commission's second objective from the mediation was to create clarity and ways to work together via the development of a governance charter. I note that the open meeting law is not my responsibility, but I do question whether the stated purpose of the mediation is appropriate for executive session, or at least for continuing withholding of executive session minutes. I'll leave that to others to decide. In any event, the length of time and resources devoted to mediation and the governance charter raises questions. Between June 2022 and December 2023, the Commission entered into executive session 16 times to discuss mediation and its governance charter. As you recall, I mentioned that the Commission executed the contract in April of 2022, but before Chair Hoffman resigned. Recently, the CCC has suggested a public disclosure of the charter is imminent in July. Even if the so-called charter is publicly released in draft or final form, many questions remain, several of which add to the confusion rather than mitigate it. I ask, as should this body, was it proper to create a draft charter in private? On whom is it binding? Can the acting executive director bind the agency? The acting chair? What about when a permanent chair or a permanent executive director is appointed, or both? Can they seek to modify it? Are we back to square one? What did we gain? And what does it tell us when an agency needs third-party ongoing mediation assistance for 2 years and counting? I cannot say that a mediation contract like that entered into here is so uncommon as itself is to raise concerns. Government agencies use experts for assistance with internal policies, procedures, and practices all the time. But the mediation here to resolve internal conflicts about roles and responsibilities and to produce a written governance charter does seem to be an unusual use and in place for a substantial period of time. The CCC has paid at least $160,000 for this work so far over the last this is over at least 16 meetings, and seems to be an excessive amount of time to do this type of work, regardless of what revenue the agency brings in or what the size of its annual operating budget may be. All of this work has been conducted out of public view under an executive session exemption to the open meeting law. Again, is that appropriate? The turnover and instability impact on the ability of the Commission to do its work. Certainly, turnover, especially as part of the new world post-pandemic, is not unique to the CCC. So why is its turnover so concerning? Why is it a symptom? Just like sneezing, it may be a symptom of a larger health issue, or it may be a simple routine sneeze. Context matters. I would suggest that the turnover, including commissioners that do not last for their full terms and individuals in professional leadership positions, leave for factors that include confusion regarding who is in charge, who manages whom, and what functions are managed by whom, who decides what, frustration, possibly with the ongoing public drama and inability to move beyond the issues of governance. While the Commission has made it difficult to fully ascertain its turnover rate, which is certainly contrary to its claim of cooperation, among other things, based upon public records, public posting information, the Acting Executive Director's Board report packet, and other sources, it is clear to see currently the Commission has over 20 vacancies. Many are critical leadership positions: Executive Director, General Counsel, Chief of Investigations and Enforcement, Deputy General Counsel, Enforcement Counsel, and HR Manager. Interestingly, certain positions have had rapid turnover, including the position of General Counsel. The rationale to remove authority from the acting executive director to focus on hiring and recruiting may not be the full reason for this action. Nonetheless, its goal of freeing up time for the acting executive director also takes more time from the commissioners and is inconsistent with the statute and the department head signatory designation, causing further confusion, not less. As I have said publicly and repeatedly, this is not personal and not about specific individuals. It is about a statute that is inconsistent and a lived history that shows that a number of past and present commission chairs, commissioners, acting and permanent executive directors, and professional staff have not been able to successfully navigate these issues such that, quote, the noise goes away. To be clear, this dysfunction should not be confused with the Commission having disagreements related to the Commission's core functions to approve licenses, promulgate regulations, and decide enforcement actions. Discourse, debate, and disagreements related to those functions are expected and are part of a healthy board. I am not alone in making these observations. As the Boston Globe editorial of June 24, 2024 stated, and I quote, in a remarkable letter, Inspector General Shapiro wrote, urging lawmakers to revamp its governance structure and suggesting they authorize the appointment of a receiver to run the agency in the meantime. Lawmakers should take Shapiro's advice and rebuild the agency with a clear chain of command, unquote. Past history is the best predictor of future outcomes. Thus, without any change to the statute, it does suggest that the next leaders, chairs, commissioners, executive directors, etc., may not have any greater success without the necessary statutory, regulatory, and procedural changes all being taken. So the question that is often asked is, why now? I was prompted to make the recommendation of a receiver now because, one, it has become clear to us that the issue is the statute and not the individuals, and two, the legislative calendar. I'll first address why I say it has become clear that it is the statute and not the individuals. We have seen the same issues repeat over the past few years, no matter who fills the role of chair, commissioner, or executive director. Who has the authority to run the agency day to day? The issues most recently came to the fore at the June Commission meeting. At the time, in a split vote, the Commission changed the day-to-day responsibilities of the acting executive director. As you know, by statute, the executive director, quote, shall be the executive and administrative head of the Commission and shall be responsible for administering and enforcing the law relative to the Commission and to each administrative unit thereof, unquote. How does this work when the Commission changes those responsibilities? Who makes the determination about the executive director's responsibilities? The legislature or the Commission? I strongly believe this action demonstrates that the agency lacks clear lines of authority. In essence, changing the executive director's or acting executive director's authority moves the day-to-day decision-making to the Commission, contrary to the statute language otherwise. Given that only the legislature can fix the problem with the statute, I believe it timely for the legislature to act before the formal legislative session ends on July 31st. As you are aware, the industry was designed, in part, to assist communities and individuals that were disproportionately negatively impacted by past actions regarding the application of drug laws, the criminal justice system, the lack of economic opportunity and empowerment. These issues and others were at the forefront of what the newly emerging cannabis industry was designed to confront and to address. While progress is being made based upon the work of the investigation and professionals, I believe that the ongoing issues impede the Commission from carrying out its stated mission. Because only the legislature can effectuate this change, now is the time for the legislature to take action before its formal session ends. which would leave a lengthy period well into the new calendar year before any stabilizing action could otherwise be taken. If the need were not urgent, I would not have approached the matter in this manner. I believe there is a need for immediate action, which can be supplemented with further study and action next legislative session, but delaying taking any action during this session is not in the interest of the Commonwealth, the industry, those whom the industry is trying to economically empower, and the public. I respectfully suggest that as the creator of this commission and the appropriators of its funding, you have the opportunity to right the ship and set it back on your intended course. What can the legislature do? What are the next steps? Again, this is not about the people, but it's about the structure. The governance structure needs to be fixed, but it is going to take time, and there are a variety of opinions as what needs to happen. However, day to day, there is an industry that is relying on this commission, and there are over 100 employees that work for the agency, and those people need to know who's in charge. Right now, some things are done by the acting executive director, some things are done by the commission as a whole, some appear to be done by the acting chair. And if I am an employee who works there, it is very unclear to me to whom I report and from whom I take direction. This is simply unacceptable and adds to the turnover and may impact the ability to effectively recruit and hire. There's a need for clarity around daily operational control and authority. Although now out of its infancy, the cannabis industry is still a relatively new industry within the Commonwealth. In order for a new industry to develop and flourish, it needs clarity and continuity. What is coming from the Commission has not been that. Thus, small local entrepreneurs looking to enter the industry, investors, landlords, municipalities, and the public have all expressed at varying levels how the confusion has impacted their interactions and business within this emerging industry. This uncertainty puts the ability for the Commonwealth to maximize the revenue potentially at risk. How do we get there? I believe that there is a two-step solution. First, legislatively create a receiver and create a quick, streamlined appointment process before the formal session ends on July 31st. I believe, as previously stated, that there is an immediate need to appoint a receiver with clearly delineated authority to oversee the day-to-day activities. Past examples of government-appointed receivers. While there may not be an exact example from another state agency of my recommendation to appoint a receiver, there is precedent for the appointment of public receivers. The cities of Chelsea and Springfield had receivers appointed and emerged from receivership with higher bond ratings, balanced budgets, and streamlined operations. School districts like Lawrence and Holyoke have been placed in receivership. The MBTA, despite having a board, had a new structure in an MBTA finance board put in place for many years. The Chelsea Housing Authority was put into receivership many years ago when there was litigation involving its former executive director, Michael McLaughlin. While none of these are exactly on point with what is being asked for here for a state agency to be put into receivership, I would suggest that this action is not a regular occurrence, thankfully. But also, each of these was unique when the action was first contemplated. Similarly, this ask is unique based upon a set of circumstances and facts that confront the Cannabis Commission as an agency working to create a new industry, working with a vast number of new entrepreneurs, working in a more difficult financing environment due to a federal government restriction on loans, coupled with it being an important source of municipal and state revenue. This makes it a state agency unlike most of the other 157 plus or minus state agencies. Thus, the need to keep a business path and an industry operational and maintain an important Commonwealth revenue stream vibrant is a new and unique challenge. A delay in timing certainly puts this all at risk. The role of the commissioners. Is there still a role for the commissioners? Upon Upon appointment of the receiver, the commissioners would continue to play a leadership role with cannabis policy, licensing, enforcement, and matters of this nature. Additionally, the commissioners would be responsible for the vote to appoint and hire an executive director, thus continuing to effectively carry out the will of the voters in the 2016 referendum. Still a commission subject to the open meeting law, while also having it on the agency side under the receivership, have it operate more like other state agencies. Second, commit to governance restructuring early next legislative session. I believe, as previously stated, that there is an immediate need to appoint a receiver with clearly delineated authority to oversee the day-to-day activities. With this stability, the committee can conduct a focused and deliberative revisioning of the governance structure in the early part of the next legislative session. This second step will take some time, which can be afforded with the protection for the industry that a receiver will provide. The time to act is now. I respectfully suggest appointing a receiver this session will steady the ship while the legislature takes some time next session to consider the statute and make the necessary changes to provide clarity and definition of roles. While I believe a receiver is the wisest immediate choice because it can most quickly restore confidence, stability, and operational success while also allowing for a governance revisioning to occur in the next legislative session. I certainly respect that the decision of what to do rests with this committee, your legislative colleagues, and legislative leadership. That said, time is of the essence. The longer the CCC flounders, the less certainty and stability for applicants and licensees, patients and caregivers, investors, consumers, and host communities. Stability and certainty will help attract the strongest and most qualified candidates to fill the upward of 20 open positions at the Commission and enable budget makers to project revenue with greater confidence. Immediate action before this legislative session ends will send a message of assurance to what is now a $7 billion industry within the Commonwealth. In conclusion, I do not make this recommendation lightly, but I make it urgently. Respectfully, I submit that waiting until the next legislative session to begin is fraught with risk and uncertainty that will impact an emerging industry that is already struggling to gain a solid footing. The industry needs the attention of the Commission and the professional leadership on their needs and not a furtherance of the issues that have been a hallmark of the CCC nearly since its inception. This is not to say that the CCC is not performing and has not done any good work, but without stability and ultimately corrective structural changes, the Cannabis Commission will have trouble reaching its highest potential. Again, this stems from a problem with the law, not the people involved, and this was never about individuals or specific people. I thank you for your indulgence and for giving me a considerable amount of time to present my points to you. I thank you, and with the Chair's permission, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate that. Just before we move to questions, just want to recognize we have Representative Sousa from Framingham has joined us, and virtually Representative Cruz of Salem has also joined us. So thank you for your testimony. We'll move into some questions from the committee now. If you permit me, I'd like to ask a couple questions myself, then we'll open it up to the regular committee, the rest of the committee members. You know, just kind of going through your testimony and looking at the letter you had sent as well. When did the Inspector General's office really first generally start looking seriously at the CCC or considering?
What I would say is, like many and probably many on this committee, we hear from lots of people. There were general kinds of complaints, as I shared in my testimony. And I mean, certainly from what the acting chair has indicated in her letter, last fall, we were looking at things more formally. But I will say I am about 20 months into my term, and complaints about how long things take there were there on day one. So This is certainly an agency that is on people's minds, and I think people have felt that it hasn't been operating to its full potential. As I said, we try to weed out those types of complaints that we get that seem more administrative to an agency than what we would generally look at. That's been more complicated for the reasons that I shared. I'm not sure where I would refer some of those things to have the agency look into itself in those issues.
And in your letter, you mentioned too that you believe you used the term limited scope in your observations. I mean, do you feel confident that the information that you gathered is sufficient to request the full breadth of recommendations that you've mentioned in your letter?
Sure. What I meant by limited scope is I wanted to share the issues that were of concern to me with regard to governance. You know, are there other streams of things that we're looking at and that come up in those complaints, and having us sort of triage and work through them, and they're different types of topics. You know, I do think that it was sufficient to be able to carve things out, and, you know, I make no representation of if any of those other things will produce an investigation or a report or where they will go. But what I will say is that in the meeting the commission meeting in mid-June, when there was the determination to take authority away from the acting executive director, and with the concern that the legislative session was going to be ending in 6 weeks, I felt that we had done enough work on the governance issue. We were very clear on where the root cause of this was, and we needed to take action for the reasons that I said. It's an emerging industry. We're trying to help those that were harmed from other actions. And one of the big concerns that I have is for those that are new entrepreneurs, and there are hundreds, unlike other things like the Gaming Commission, where there's a small number of entities that they're involved in regulating that are all large companies. These tend to be very small entrepreneurs that are trying to get a foothold in, and where the federal government doesn't recognize this, it's very hard to get credit. And so any of these things that cause delay, either it costs more money than it needs to, or it can bankrupt people before they can even open their door to test the waters. So those kinds of things that I saw meant that on the governance slice of this, I had enough. I didn't need to get more documents. I didn't need to interview more people. I didn't need to do more, but the governance was the problem, and it kept coming back to that. So I hope that answers your question.
No, it does, yeah. And as far as receivership itself, now it is unique, I believe. You haven't called for receivership for a state agency before, correct?
I'm not aware. I mean, I'm not aware that one has done that, as I shared. That being said, I do think that in the instances that I highlighted, circumstances have people meet the moment. You know, I would imagine, you know, I have some recollection of the Chelsea Housing Authority receivership, but that's a super complicated piece where you have federal dollars, you have commissioners that are appointed by the governor, and you have commissioners that are appointed locally. So I would imagine, while the process was different, those that were making the decisions, I would imagine they didn't think that was the easiest path or the clearest path, and were looking, has this ever been done? Nonetheless, they took action. So I would say in any of these instances, there's not lots of examples of when to do it. But what makes this different, in my opinion, than 157 plus or minus other state agencies is it's a revenue stream that's quite significant. We're trying to grow it. And as I said, those that it serves, I don't think it's serving well. And I do think that this action, while unique, severe, would provide clarity and would allow the agency to function, while also giving the legislature time to thoughtfully look at the other issues that we're talking about on governance.
And were there other options that, you know, your office or your staff had considered instead of receivership? Were there other avenues that maybe you thought were incorrect or weren't going to solve the crisis? Or was receivership really the only option that you think is there in the short term?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I appreciate the question, Mr. Chair. I think that if it weren't a legislative creation, and it was created in some other faction, and not making any judgment on that piece, I think you could maybe go to step 2 and make that quicker. But because we have a short legislative window, We did think that was important. I mean, but structurally, you could make some changes. You could clarify what the roles and responsibilities are, and then implement those. You know, I just don't think that that kind of work could get done as quickly. But, you know, that would certainly allow you to eliminate having to do that. But I would be concerned about that, as I indicated in my testimony and through the report. You know, there have been letters circulating among your colleagues and among many of you, and conversations and hearings about things that are wrong. So it's not that my testimony or my letter are uniquely saying there's a problem at the Cannabis Commission. I think what I'm trying to do is to say the time is now and we need to act, and I try to pull it all together under the stature of the office that I'm you know, honored to serve as the Inspector General. Is kind of the role that I look at. But I do think you could fix it, but I think that would be harder. And as much as I think receiver seems to be severe, I think it sends an important message, and it would give the stability that would be needed, in my opinion.
Excellent. You mentioned too the conversations around mediation and also a governance document that's being worked on. You know, do you share concern? You share some concerns that won't be sufficient in order to achieve any change, particularly with the staff turnaround. Is that kind of correct?
You know, part of it is that I think that there are two different pieces to this, at least in my estimation. But as I say, a lot of this is being done in executive session. So until something comes out from that, it's hard to opine. What I will say is it's not uncommon for agencies to do some kind of a mediation where leadership doesn't get along. I think it, as you would expect in regular life and in private industry, two people aren't going anywhere, and you kind of figure out how you need to sort of be polite and let somebody finish speaking and do whatever the interpersonal things are. But ultimately, you know, that's the organization and what you do. You know, I can't speak to what exactly they were looking to do by that, but I think that in some way there's some interpersonal thing that was going on. I think that belongs in private. It's more like an HR matter. I think the idea that's more broadly about governance and roles and responsibilities, I don't really, one, understand why that would be done in private, and that wouldn't be a public thing, that the public, all of you might have some interest in paying it, you know, listening to those sessions, attending those meetings, and seeing if it's consistent with your intent. The other piece of it is when this draft or this report or this charter comes out, allegedly at some hearing later this month, possibly, although that's been said before, so I don't really know. I don't really understand who it's binding on. For instance, if the acting chair signs on behalf of the commission and the acting executive director signs, is she able to do that? Because I think she can only do HR things. So I don't know what that would mean. If the permanent chair comes in and a new executive director is hired, which I understand they're in the hiring process for, what does that person do? And if neither of those people or one of those people don't agree, like, are we back to 2 years ago? And we're going to then start this whole process again? And if somebody doesn't like it, and they say the statute says this, how can you, by a charter, more narrow it? You know, there are ways that regulations, which is a formal open process, can fill in the gaps within a statute, which is very common. You know, the idea of a charter that's going to further fill it in, it's very unclear to me that it was done in a way that is appropriate. And also the end result, I'm not really certain that it would be binding on anybody except for the moment it's signed. So those are concerns that I have.
And you mentioned a little bit in your testimony too about, you know, there is a unique structure to the CCC, it being a commission. And you had, you know, alluded to the Gaming Commission, Post Commission, other commissions that, you know, the legislature has created in the past. You know, is your office seen similar difficulties with a commission model, maybe generally speaking, in the dealing with day-to-day operations that may have, you know, that are unique to each of those different industries, or is it unique to maybe the commission model in general that you find difficulties?
Sure. No, that's a great question, and I will give two parts to that answer. One is that specifically, while we have looked across the commissions, the executive director authority in Cannabis and the Gaming Commission as an example, in many ways have some analogous language. Within the Gaming Commission, there are some other more specific enumerated responsibilities. One has to do with some authority with regard to the administrative divisions, and it's clear about what the authority is on that. There's also another piece about the advisory committees and sort of what the role is. And in one, in the Gaming Commission, there's sort of a clear role on, there's some roles in that. So there are some differences there. On the other side, I would say, without getting about personalities, the model that we have used for commissions, I think is not without risk, and that some of the other commissions could have gone sideways, but individuals and roles, and I'm trying to, not get too specific, but, ultimately that wasn't what happened. Maybe it's because, as I've shared before, the subject matter is broader for gaming, so you don't get some of these other issues. Maybe it's other factors. Post has some other complexities with how it works. On the other side, it's very clear about what they needed to quickly do with regard to all of the commissioned police officers across the state. So in some of the way that work, they needed to get going, and they had a deadline. But I will say that certainly should the legislature and this committee decide to do more thinking on this, I would imagine that things that you come up with would be beneficial to the other commissions, and for the future, should the legislature think that a commission is appropriate. And there are challenges for using a commission model as opposed to an agency. I understand that, and I think we have some rationale for why this is the model. I think when you have some public policy kinds of matters, that it's important. And so I do say that I think others would benefit from it. I'd be careful to say that the solution to this is more closely mirroring another commission. I think that could have some risk to it.
Just one other question before I open it up. I just want to touch, you briefly brought up the idea of, with the CCC having, open meeting law applications. So how, if in a receivership situation, how do you balance administrative efficiencies with, demands for or calls for transparency?
Sure. So I think, that's a great question. I think that as others have done, with the clarity of what the responsibilities are and those things that are administrative, I think things like maybe signing an office lease, maybe determining what the hybrid work policy is, things like that don't need to, in my opinion, be part of a public discourse, and they need to be done so that the employees who work there know what the rules are. On the other side, things about public policy, about how long we're going to take to resolve matters and other kinds of things, and enforcement and hiring maybe the most significant, highest level members. Certainly the executive director would belong to the commission. But I think that it could be reasonably worked out in short order as to what's in this list and what's in that list, by then maintaining the spirit and intent of having a commission publicly do what it needs to do. But I would argue, some of the pieces that they're doing now on sort of these kind of governance conversations, as I said, it's, for others to weigh in if that's appropriate. Maybe if it was an agency, those kinds of things would be happening probably in private. It's a public agency, so right now I'm just not sure, I'm interested to hear what, and read the charter. But I'll be, in line, I'm in line like everyone else, apparently. So, does that answer?
Yeah. No.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any questions from the committee? Representative Sauter?
Inspector General, thank you. You've done a fantastic job in your analysis. I think you've done a very thorough job. I've had a lot of issues with the CCC since I've come into office, and some of the things they do, some of the things that were under the previous director, commissioners, et cetera. It has been a concern of mine, personally, the revolving door of commissioners resigning abruptly. It seems like it is a huge problem. and I think it's something that definitely needs to be addressed. I think one of the glaring things, I'm going to make a comment, then I'm going to ask a few questions that, preparing for this hearing. I also, Mr. Chair, thank you for doing this through the speaker, appointed, I think, one of the most thorough chairs in his leadership office. This is a very tenuous situation, and I know you have been addressing a lot of our concerns and issues, and I am glad that you chose to have this hearing today and have the Inspector General here. Thank you very much for that. It seems to me that as you did your investigation, there's something that's very glaring to me, that we have commissioners resigning, commissioners moving in and out. We have executive directors thriving on a little bit of a power grab. Then we have acting directors who should have authority to do their job, but then are stripped from an acting commissioner, supposed acting commissioner. Is it fair to say that some of your analysis, without saying it, shows that there seems to be a power grab that wants to happen here, or kind of an authority of what my job is versus what your job is, and then what we have is we create that power vacuum for doing what really needs to be done with the commission or the executive director's position. Can you just answer that question for me real quick?
Sure. I appreciate your kind words. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you and your colleagues, and the words that you said about the hard work that we have been doing in this space. What I would say is, I think it really goes back to the root of my testimony, which is that because it's unclear into the statute, those, and not making this personal about anyone in particular, but I think those that want to try to figure out where the boundaries are between those two statutory roles, one could find it, and one could find a solution to that. If one chose to do the same work or suggest that they both have that authority, I think that it's fair that that could happen. So I think that what I might say is the outcome and what we're seeing, while disappointing, may not be surprising. And I guess the success that we should take from it is that other commissions don't behave this way.
Right, right.
If that helps, and I hope
Yes.
that answers your question.
So I want to focus on the charter, the governance charter for a little bit. During your investigation, did you ask, where it was done in the executive session, did you ask if those minutes were preserved, video recordings preserved, any of that stuff? Did you ask during the investigation, is any of that preserved? Because at some point, what concerns me is that if and when these minutes are released so that we can actually see the dialogue around a very important governance document, that what concerns me is, are we going to see the true minutes coming out and recordings coming out, or are we going to see what they feel they can want to release and what they don't want to release? That's a concern for me, because I really want to see the discussion points around how that was, that document, once it's finally out there, how it came to fruition. I have a big problem with hiding, going into executive session, even from on municipal levels when it comes to charter documents, being kind of not having the proper minutes to how they got to that decision making. So during your investigation, did you ask how that information was preserved?
So I think what I would be comfortable, I very much appreciate the question. I think looking at how they do agendas and how they do minutes in public sessions is some indication of what maybe one could expect. What I would say, and what I will say, is that as we always do, we've asked for thorough information, and from the internal letters that were provided from the acting chair, I think you can see how I, at least in my testimony, had some question as to how that is considered cooperation.
Right.
At mostly every turn, the authority of this office has been questioned, and the idea of her determination and others as to what my authority is and what I'm able to do and what the statute is and how you define those terms. I don't think belongs to a state agency. It may belong to you if there's a lack of clarity. It may belong to a court. But this is pretty unique. And I would say not just in my almost 2 years in this job, but if I ask some of my predecessors, I would say in the 40-year history of this agency, it's pretty unique. So what's going to be there, I don't know. We've asked for materials, and I reaffirmed the request on, I don't know, maybe the beginning of July.
I have a feeling it's because they don't want it to be made public, because I think there's things in there that would, I think, shock the public, is my personal opinion, but, yeah.
So they, but the request, the longstanding request was reaffirmed. I think that, to I think a point the chair asked earlier, at some point, I don't need more information of what I already can tell to ultimately determine that something needs to be done, which is the action that I took.
On the acting ED role, the acting chair seems like stripped the powers of the acting ED. So what do we have this executive director doing if we stripped their powers? What are they doing?
Well, some of it I think is further conflicting. I only speak for my role as the Commonwealth Inspector General, but just historically, before I was appointed to this role, I was the first deputy comptroller. So I know a thing or two about that office. So the idea that in one way saying that it's only this role and it's to do the HR, and at another point there's a document that's on file and there's comments that have said that that individual also has the department head signatory authority, and without getting people into the weeds of how government truly works, the back end of the administrative piece, that function is much broader and much different than that HR role. So immediately, as I shared in my testimony, that creates conflict. What is the comptroller to do based on the department head signatory authority form that he has in his office based on public comments and a vote that says she is only, and I don't say only pejoratively, but I say narrowly, is the HR director. So she's presumably signing contracts for that agency. She's possibly signing off on the payroll, and that it's certifying payroll. So not to cause more concern or more problems, but I have no idea what any of that might mean.
The license.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. No,
I just wanted to
finish,
say,
please.
or to the bigger point, I don't know that she has the authority to do that. The statute says something else. I don't know how a vote of a commission can overrule what the statute says. I think that if they agreed and they found some commonality, maybe you could get there in sort of filling in the blanks with a piece. But that's some of the concern that I have with the charter, that presumably the charter is going to fill in where the statute is, and when somebody disagrees and they go back to the primary source of the general laws, the general law is going to say something different. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
In your investigation role, I just want to kind of jump over to licensing aspect of the CCC. Did you see any waste, fraud, or abuse in your investigation of licensing fees or lack of collecting licensing fees that under that particular direction of that department head and or that department's office? Was any of that ever come up, or have you looked at or investigated? Because that to me is a big concern. And I guess the thing that's frustrating for me is that sometimes people don't think lawmakers pay attention to stuff, and we pay attention to a lot of things, and we see a lot of things, and we ask a lot of questions. And, things come to our attention. So I guess my question is, on that licensing aspect of it, did you see anything particular there that would have a huge concern of waste, fraud, and abuse?
I appreciate the question, and I think what I would say is that the letter that I wrote and the work that we've done has been focused on governance. I did say in my testimony that our work continue despite some obstacles that were put there, and our work continues. I will say that the publicity from my concerns continues to have people talking, and I would encourage you, constituents of yours, or any members to get a hold of us, because we're always interested. And I would say that there has been more of an uptick in the probably month or so since I've been talking about this with other information. And I would encourage any of that information to come to us for our investigators. But to speak right now, I think that my preference at this point would be to keep my remarks focused on governance, if I might.
In Inspector General, you're absolutely right. Sometimes it takes cracks in the foundation for actually the water and freedom to be spread out there for people to feel comfortable that there's not going to be retribution on anything that they come forward with.
I would, if I could just on that, I would just remind all of you, your colleagues, and the public, we do have a whistleblower statute, and so I do want to make sure that anyone that ever thinks that employment is going to be an issue for them, they should look at that. They can certainly call our office and talk to somebody about what that means. I just want to put that out there.
I'm afraid Inspector General Washington, D.C. kind of screwed that up for the United States with whistleblower status, okay?
We do. I hope we do that.
I don't want to go into that because
No,
that's not part of
I
our,
hear you.
that's not part of our discussion today. I guess from an emergency management planning measures, what should the CCC implement in your recommendation to mitigate risks associated with leadership instability? And how should the CCC ensure that its operations continue uninterrupted during leadership transitions and crisis? Because my biggest fear is, and why I ask this question is, we have a lot of cannabis facilities. I have a lot in my district. I worry about the oversight, the questions. I got more calls in the last 2 months of answers and questions that the CCC hasn't answered yet. And I think a lot of that's a lot of this instability. What concerns me is this is a $7 billion industry. What concerns me is, and I get it, politics is politics, and people are appointed in positions, and in business that happens also. I hate to say it, but sometimes it's people you feel comfortable with in these positions and you appoint them, but that doesn't mean they're the best and the brightest that are appointed or hired as CEOs in the private sector. I guess my question is, this is a $7 billion operation. They have the backing of the Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the taxpayers to, any financial issues that they have. The problem I have is I'm afraid we're kind of running like the Wild West down there. I have thought that for a while. And my concern is that the taxpayer is going to be on a dole for something that we actually get a very large tax revenue for. But we also, things are going to slip through the cracks on a very regulated substance that a lot of the people in the public are okay with, and it's legal, but still have concerns with. So in your opinion, as you're looking through this, what of some of those things that you think that we should mitigate? Obviously, what you're asking us to do here in this overall report, but what are some of the immediate things that we could do?
So I appreciate the question. I think that's why I felt the need to take the unusual step of suggesting a receiver. Because I do think, if you look at the agency, and we talked about the vacancies, there's an executive director position that's vacant. There's a general counsel position that's vacant, and I will say that in September 2023, they had an acting general counsel. Since then, they've had a general counsel who has since left, and they're now back to an acting. And I make no judgment about the person who's in the acting, but presumably the person sometime between September and now, I would imagine, didn't think they were taking the job for a handful of months. Like, I have no insight to why they left, but one would have thought that they were the permanently appointed general counsel, and so factors, may have gone into that. So I say that because when so many leadership positions are open, even when they're filling them, I don't know that the next candidates that will take those roles regardless of how good they may be and what their hopes and aspirations are, that they're going to meet their full potential. It's for that reason that I believe putting a receiver in and putting a stake in the ground will allow the administrative operational piece to go forward. And the reason that I think that's the first step, because then from there, one part can be to go into the issues that you're talking about. And I think in my examples, the reason I put the data breach piece, we all read the newspapers. Those things can kind of happen. Stores that we all shop in, banks and financial institutions that we're customers to, it happens. So I didn't put it there to say it doesn't happen, but I put it there to show the kinds of things that we would expect in a maturing agency to start thinking about. All of those kinds of what I like to think of as sort of the key documents at an agency, sort of the maintenance documents and the sort of care and protecting of an agency. Like, there's no idea how those are going, how procedures are, how policies are. To go to your point, what are the reconciliations that are going on internally, the checks and balances to make sure things are either billed or collected, and I'm not prepared to talk on those kinds of things, but if you don't have the beginning pieces of it, the administrative pieces, the rest of it sort of falters, in my opinion. And so I think you have to, it's an operational agency, so how we do this, I think, matters. We also want to send a message, and we can't do all things at once, and I think a logical way to do it is to gain some trust, gain some stability, send a message, and then that person administratively can ask those kinds of questions from inside. How do we bill? How do we reconcile? We brought in a lot of money. Is that, compared to what? What should we have brought in? $7 billion over the life of the agency, that's great, but compared to what we could have brought in, I have no idea. Because it takes so long to license, could those places have gone online sooner? And we could have, those are questions. In our own work, I know that, we've had a few cases that there have been some issues with host agreements. So I think those then go back, presumably to the agency. And I make no judgment about what the next steps are on that. But I just say in my tenure, we've had a few of those cases, and those have been publicly reported. Those now have to come back, and I think the agency's got to take a look and see, what's the status of those kinds of things.
What's very frustrating too for me is that, in the 2 terms that I've been on the cannabis committee and especially under this chair, we've worked very diligently on putting laws in place, things in place, wanting things implemented on time, doing our due diligence, having multiple hearings, long hearings, reading testimony. Just seems to me like when everything gets down to that level, the CCC, your report is dead on. It just seems like, I don't want to say spit in the eye of the legislature, but it almost seems to me like they don't care about what we say and they want to interpret how or their own rules. Would you say in your investigation that some of that was going on with some of the things that we were doing as a body here in good faith to protect a very, very big industry, as you said?
I think I appreciate the question. I think folks can certainly draw their own conclusions, but I would say it's highly unusual to have an agency that we're looking at continue to suggest that we don't have authority and then publicly indicate that they're cooperative. I mean, you may think we don't have the authority, so I guess pursue that, but that's not cooperative. I think in other public remarks that have been made, and you can sort of see how they were addressed, I do think it's an agency that thinks they're beholden to no one, that there's no oversight, and they can kind of do as they please. And I guess what I would say is, and I appreciate all the work you're doing, I think there's an opportunity here to suggest otherwise. Not the only opportunity, and you'll decide collectively and as a body what you want to do. But I certainly would say that they're suggesting that our work is for some purpose other than the good of the public, and that the integrity of our office is in question. And those are the kinds of things that I think desperate entities do when they're desperate times.
Well, I'm going to let the chair kind of bounce around. I just want to reserve my right to ask more questions after everybody's there. But I think as we go on and I hear my colleagues ask questions, I'll probably have a few more to follow up, maybe not. But I just want to say, just in case not, I don't ask anymore. I think you're dead on. It is unprecedented for us to have, and I worry about the precedent we're going to set if we put this into receivership. I do have that feeling. I think the chair kind of asked that question. It's never been done before for a state agency. You pointed out the Housing Authority, which could be a good example of that. But we've seen schools go into receivership, school districts. We've seen municipalities. Those are multi-billion-dollar operations also. I think we need to do something. We need to do something very drastic. I think there has to be a lot of changes there. I don't think it just internally. I think we have to look at appointments and things like that are being made. I think it needs a revamp. And I will just say publicly, from when this started, the commissioners that were there from the beginning who kind of put this thing in infant stages, built something strong. Somewhere after those folks left, there was this power grab or something. I don't know what it was, maybe less oversight, but we had too many good commissioners bounce off to carry that pendulum over a very good department, and something happened. And I don't know where that is, and I'm hoping that we can find it, but I think the only way we're gonna be able to find it is if we use your recommendations and come up with some sort of solution to have somebody go in and kind of set a new precedent, clear the air, and let's get this going, because this is a big tax revenue for this state. We desperately rely on it for revenue, and I think the public wants confidence in it. And I want to applaud you again, Mr. Chair, for having this hearing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Move to Vice Chair Consalvo as a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, let me thank you for having this hearing. I think it's really important, and I want to thank you for, as your vice chair, watching you and your laser-like focus on these issues that impact this industry. You've done a great job, so I appreciate being part of that. And Inspector General, thank you for being here today and for your thoughtful testimony. I want to piggyback just quickly on sort of where the chair was going earlier, and at the end of the previous speaker's testimony, where he ended up going, was around considering, other structural changes that may need to be made, and your consideration of what did you consider sort of other structural changes before you came to the really big decision on receivership. And I want to underscore, as someone who's been in government a long time, that receivership is a really big deal, right? I would argue it's the nuclear option, hence why we've heard today that it's never been done on a state agency. I've been part of the discussions in the city of Boston about bringing the Boston Public Schools into receivership, which, I'll say for the record, as a BPS parent and Boston legislator, I'm completely against. I know these are apples and chainsaws, but I want to underscore how big of a deal, the putting an agency in receivership is, and so the public really understands sort of the intense scrutiny and controversy around that, depending upon where that ends up going. And the chair kind of brought up something that I'm very interested in, and it is that as you got to thinking about how you ended the road with receivership, around other structural changes that even maybe with receivership need to happen, but many you've highlighted here, but I want to focus particularly on something that you have littered in your testimony, which is of real interest to me, and that's among the many things you've pointed out, the issue around human resources and personnel, right? You've talked about the high level of turnover since 2017, significant disconnect on roles and responsibilities, turnover and instability and the impacting the ability of it to do its work. You listed great stats, and I'd love to see if you had more, if we had access to more, related to how many vacancies and how many postings are available. To me, the amount of times you kind of brought it up in your testimony says that that's a real issue, beyond the many other issues we've heard the previous speaker mention and the chair mention. So piggybacking on his discussion, and maybe you don't have that answer today, but I'd love to get a follow-up on that. Because of the sort of what I, again, understand to be the nuclear option of receivership, what led you to believe that then bringing in other options to address the personnel issues, which seem to be permeating many of the problems that are happening here, instead of bringing in an outside review around personnel or bringing in an expert who was the human resources director at Federal Express, I'm making that up, someone who's an expertise in coming in and streamlining human resources and personnel and making sure postings are filled and there's less turnover and there's a better onboarding process and there's better morale. These things that you kind of mentioned in your testimony, among the many, and I want to be clear, then that's not the only thing you mentioned. You've brought up many important issues that need to be addressed, but clearly that issue is in there multiple occasions, and it seems to be something that's impacting the CCC's ability to do its job professionally and correctly. Your thoughts on how you got there and why should that be addressed separate? Because you did say, and then I'll let you answer, I promise, you did say, I believe there's immediate action which can be supplemented with further study and action by the legislature next session. So kind of short-term fix, long-term fix, receivership being a short-term fix, wow, that's a big deal. I'd love you to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and I appreciate the question and the opportunity to be before you. It certainly is a big decision for us to get there and to make that recommendation. It's highly unusual. As I said, these are a highly unusual set of circumstances and facts. It's been going on in that agency almost since inception as to some of those challenges. When we look at other commissions and other entities that have been in infancy, and there have been a fair number of them, this is still highly unusual compared to that. I think that when we looked at, and we put, I think, 5 or 6 examples in my testimony, we probably could have put, many more, but you probably won't believe me, but in the interest of time, I tried to keep it short. But I also felt that I was trying to build a case.
But to that point, you specifically highlighted sort of personnel, human resources, roles and responsibilities. It's all the same kind of human resource world, for lack of a better term.
But I think it goes back to the structural piece of who's in charge and what the roles are. And if the commission feels that it's their responsibility, then that does one thing. If it's an executive director that he, she, or they feel it's their role, then it goes another direction. And I disagree that if they filled those 20 positions, they would be in any better place. So that's why I wanted to be clear that I think it's a different piece. There are lots of agencies. If you brought the Commonwealth's administrator for human resources from the executive side, I would imagine the acting HR administrator would go on about the problems recruiting and all of those things. And if you brought in some of the CEOs from some other places, those that I guess aren't laying off, but that are trying to hire, they would tell you about the challenges, the new workforce, and all these other things. In my opinion, this isn't that. It's a piece of it, but understanding what the job is. I brought up the piece about the general counsel. That was a pretty quick turnaround. I think if you look at some of these other positions, you come in, you think you understand the job, and then things radically change, or the obstacles that you confront is not the work that you thought you were hired on to do, but there's all these other kinds of things that are going on. They have a significant mission to get through, and I think and no one's denying that. On the other side, I think if all of this other noise continues to permeate, it takes up time and it takes up resources. There've been, and I'm not challenging. There's lots of different HR actions that have gone on with different people. I'm not going to the merits, and I'm not going to, get into any of those kinds of things. But I just think if you had a choice of 2 agencies that you were being hired into, and, I just don't know that this is the agency that somebody would take. And I think that says something, and I think that's unfortunate. And it's not what we as a Commonwealth are looking to do. It's a pretty interesting emerging market. And for many people, for a whole bunch of reasons, I think it's an interesting industry. That being said, I don't think that we're going to meet our potential, and I don't think that agency as it's structured is going to aspire to get there. The reason that I thought this is, and I thought long and hard, and we looked at other examples, we said, if this wasn't the facts that warrant this, then what are the facts? Was one issue that we discussed amongst our senior team. Tell me about an agency or some other kind of thing that you would suggest that you need to do this. The other part of it is, even if somebody said do this, on what authority are we going to do that if the other entity that has authority says not to do that. So it didn't seem like there was an immediate way to communicate to the industry, to the participants, and to the public stability, and that today was the new chapter moving forward, and that we heard it. All these other kinds of things felt like they could easily be undone. And I would also say that as, sort of, as maybe radical or as strong an idea as a receiver is, I would also say that, the legislature controls what that looks like. You could certainly have reports coming to you so that the information that you feel that you need on its finances that are different or on other kinds of things, you could certainly direct that that's part of it. I often get the question about how long would a receiver, be appointed for. I don't think that that's my role. I have an opinion on it, but I also think that you have control over that. Maybe it's milestones, maybe it's duration, maybe it's we'll wait and see, but we're going to appoint them, to get us, a certain amount of time into the next session. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 9 months. Like, my interest is making a state agency become what it could be, and to protect both the reputation and the finances of the Commonwealth is sort of what I look at under my piece of that. This isn't one side or the other. The commissioner side or the professional staff on it, but I don't see from all the different things that we looked at, and we looked at a lot of different things, what we would do. Could we team them up with another agency? Part of it is like anything. If you don't think there's a problem, you're not going to get help. Could I say get partnered by another commission and have that agency sort of mentor you? Sure. Could I say to the administrator, it'd be great if you could help them figure out their recruiting? I don't think they have a problem. I mean, that's just the truth. And I think if you look in the mirror every day and you don't think you have a problem, I think you need somebody to have some tough love. And I guess that's what the Inspector General is full of, tough love today.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I have other questions, but I want to give my colleagues the opportunity to ask them, so I thank you for the time.
No, I appreciate that. Any other questions
Thank
from the
you.
committee? Representative Saunders?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Shapiro, not only for your interest in this issue, but all the work. Oh, sorry. All the work that you do on behalf of taxpayers across the Commonwealth. I'd like to divide this into the two steps that you had touched on, the structure and then this question of receiver. And starting with the structure first, because candidly, I don't see the ambiguity, both in practice and in the letter of the law, and what I think is a clear letter of the law. The chair touched on it a little bit earlier, that the structure of the commission and the establishment of the executive director is nearly identical, and substantively identical in 23K, in the Gaming Commission, and in the Cannabis Commission. And we're not here talking about the Gaming Commission, and nor would we at the Cannabis Committee, but it is important to recognize that the Gaming Commission has been able to successfully operate under this structure, while the Cannabis Commission has seen different results. On the question specifically of clarifying the role of the executive director, both identical in 23K in the gaming statute and in the cannabis statute, is in section 76 of chapter 10 at subsection J, the commission shall appoint an executive director. The executive director shall serve at the pleasure of the commission. I can't imagine anything more plain. Now, the language that tasks an executive director with the day-to-day workings of the commission or the agency or whatnot, I think that we have a tried and true approach to resolving questions of statutory ambiguity. I don't know for sure, but I do not believe this question has been brought to the Superior Court. But I would imagine if there's a question about statutory roles, it seems clear to me in the statute, but if there are those who disagree, there's a forum to do that. On the question of the receiver and the commission generally, I don't know what the legal or legislative parlance is, but it's a train wreck. What's going on right now is not fair to the public, it's not fair to the members of the industry, it's not fair to the employees of the commission. And I wonder if you have brought these concerns to the appointing authorities of the commission.
Sure. So a few questions. I appreciate the questions as you brought them up. A couple of pieces. I would respectfully say that we could have problems with the Gaming Commission, and I'm trying to not make this about personalities, and I really am not, but I would suggest that this ambiguity could have gone there, and possibly for a number of different reasons, it hasn't. I would suggest one of the reasons that I suggest bifurcating this, that could certainly be the topic of a legislative hearing when there's more time in another session, not suggesting what you do, but it would be great to, bring in, the executive directors and former executive directors of other agencies and ask how that sort of worked. I would also respectfully say that as clear as it is with a commission that the executive director is the employee, as we all know, it's not so easy to get a vote to go, as you know. I mean, you're in the vote business all the time. So if I'm an executive director, I just need to make sure that it's a tie. I don't need 5 votes. I just need, some number of votes. And I'm not suggesting how this all plays out, but I would say that the remedy is less of a remedy, and also, some of this plays a little bit under the radar, a little bit under the cover kind of thing. And also, people can either slow walk things, or people can have their own agenda, that they're not going to run to the Superior Court to, get that kind of clarity, but they get a directive, and, maybe they're not. I mean, some of these things that I shared, in my testimony, why does it take so long when the regulation is changed to have it implemented? There's a whole bunch of reasons, and some of them might be the right reasons, some might be the wrong, and some might be, whatever. So I just respectfully share that it's not always as clear as that. With regard to, and I think it's a great question, the appointing authorities, I did not give them more direct notice than I did to the legislature when we came to this. And I will say that the rationale of it was, I felt that June meeting, which is what I shared in my testimony, was a turning point. Could I have spent more time on our work on governance? Absolutely. Was the team prepared to continue to do that? Yes. But going into the end of the session and going into the months with the legislature being out of formal session, I was concerned. And also, it's not just getting to January, because I'm not naive enough to think this is then the first thing that would come up. So it's another year, it's whatever it might be. And I do think that for the reasons that I said, it's an industry. I think there are entrepreneurs, there's loans, there's people that we're trying to right a wrong. And I think in some ways, on the criminal justice side, we may be righting a wrong, and we may be giving them economic uncertainty and possibly economic failure. I don't want to put a hyperbole, but it's hard to, you put all your money into this, and that's all the money you have, then that's a problem. So I didn't give them greater notice, but part of the reason that I didn't give them greater notice also is we've seen, as appointees have come and go, respectfully, that the problem has continued, and I tried to show that. And I do believe that if somebody wants to see the clarity, or you want to work together and find that, you can say you do the big stuff and I do the small stuff, but make sure you tell me. I'm not going to get into, from my right or wrong, but I did think it was worth bringing to your attention as an example, the tragic death of an employee in the industry. Like, you can draw your own conclusion, but I can't totally understand, like, how that wouldn't be known. And we have more information. I didn't, put all that into my testimony. I was trying to get to the highlights of this, but, there's a rationale for why that happened. Do I think that's a good rationale or a bad rationale? I'm just saying if I were the regulator of an industry, a commissioner, I think that that's factually something I would want to know in real time, whether you need to call a special public meeting because you can't have serial meetings, or whatever it is you need to do it, even if you want to preserve the investigatory side, and you say this happened in a public meeting, but you say, I'm not saying anything else, I don't know, but maybe that's what should have happened. Maybe not. I mean, there's another side to it, and I'm not looking to litigate that piece, but I think when we looked at that representative sample, they were all over the place. And so the idea of what we thought on our collective wisdom, it wasn't me alone in an ivory tower. I've got a really experienced team that works on these things, knows government, knows what the options are. And we thought that, if this didn't meet that, I'm not sure what does. And so that's sort of how we came to that.
And I certainly appreciate all the work that went into this and bringing the large issue into focus through these very poignant examples. Do you believe that the commission is substantially cooperating with your investigation?
I'm sorry?
Is the commission substantially cooperating with your investigation?
I guess with the qualifier, it would be hard for me to tell substantially.
Well,
I mean-
to the level you would like and expect from a state agency. Let me ask it that way.
I would say no.
Do you believe that cooperating with the Office of the Inspector General is a duty of the commission?
I believe that I have a statutory responsibility to carry out Chapter 12A, which includes this kind of work, and also within that statute is reporting to the legislature on findings that I do, which is what I believe that I have done. So I believe that to my ability, I'm continuing to carry out my mission.
I agree with that entirely, and I also agree that it's the duty of the commissioners, and individually as well as together as a commission, to cooperate and to be responsive to the Office of the Inspector General. Any of the appointing authorities can remove a commissioner for substantial neglect of their duties. And when I hear that there is not clear cooperation, unambiguous, unimpeded cooperation, then that's neglecting the duty of the commissioner. And while I know we're not here to speak to personalities, to me, it suggests strong evidence that we need the right team, because we know this structure works in other forums. Can it be perfected? Certainly. Can it be improved? Absolutely. I think we do this session in and session out looking for ways to improve. But I think we have a more fundamental problem when a group of 4 or 5 cannot get to the point of reaching consensus for the obligations to which they're appointed. These are not individual campaigns that commissioners run. They are set with a charge in charter by statute. It's reinforced by hundreds of pages of regulation, and not to sound like a broken record, I was thumbing through it yesterday in preparation for the hearing, and I stopped at about 15 references of the commission delegating to the executive director for any number of things, which I think further suggests for a former, current, acting, whatever executive director, be sure you report to the commission under any set of circumstances. But I hope that out of this hearing, as the legislature considers its options and its actions, that the commissioners hear loud and clear that the expectation of one member, at the very least, is that they cooperate with you. And if you have questions for them, they answer, and they answer in a timely fashion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Berthium.
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro, for coming today. This is long overdue, I would say, and I think in your investigation you can tell that. I'll go quick because I know you've been here a while. To the representative's point, did you ever ask for anything that they refused to give you? Anyone in the commission, or, sorry.
What I would say, and I refer to the attachments that the acting chair put out there, that was dialogue, what I would say is there were items that we asked for that they were not going to provide, and I would say that I didn't bring that to conclusion. And I moved on to other issues because there were plenty of other pieces. So I always want to be fair. I don't think I brought it. In other agencies, when we ask for things, we get them, and there isn't
All the time. You get it all the
there isn't a
time.
whole lot of dialogue as to what our authority is. So if I continue to ask, I don't know. I did ask for some other documents, as I said, in early July after my letter. There's been more back and forth about my authority, and the letters always end with cooperation. So, I take it for what it is. I don't have everything, but I also believe that the conclusion that I reached wasn't based on a lack of information or me deciding that on my own or without doing the work that's required to come to a conclusion. Could it be stronger? Could I have more examples? Absolutely, but I don't. I hope that answers.
So this is an agency obviously trying to hide stuff from you and us, obviously. I mean, and that's not opinion, that's just fact, if they're not going to provide you with all the information you need.
Well, I imagine that you'll see a charter when I see a charter. I have lots of questions, as my testimony suggests, and I could have had more definitive answers with regard to what might be in the charter, where I said I'm not sure that it's binding, that I'm not sure how it fills in the gaps, I'm not sure what clarity it's going to give. But that's only one piece of this. There are many other parts of it, and I would say that we regularly request information from agencies, and we regularly get the information.
So to the point of this, the governance stuff that's going on right now, that they're doing an executive session, that has to be unusual, because if you're just coming up with a charge for a committee, there's no reason that you would have to go into executive session. None. I can't think of one. Because we're not talking about personnel issues or typical stuff like that. This is just, we're coming up with how we're going to do daily business, who's going to be in charge of what, who's going to do what job. No reason that should be an executive session.
I certainly appreciate your comment on that. I would say that part of the confusion is they use the word mediate. Like, I'm not sure if I'm a provider of service or if I'm an agency buying a service, what they're getting. I'm not sure that I would consider that mediation. But if you were to go to the statute, I think there's an exception with regard to that kind of term. So, is the term what's driving it, or is the work that's being done driving it?
I mean, you can put whatever term you want on it. Basically, they're trying to come up with a charge. That's it.
So, yeah.
And quickly to that also, so I know the chair of the commission stepped down or was fired or put on leave. She appointed another commissioner. The commissioners there didn't like that, so they voted out, when clearly in the statute it says the commissioner on leave will appoint the incoming commissioner. But so that, and you said many times they haven't followed the law, so why hasn't anything been done with that? Who would do that? Secretary of State would do that? Do they need a complaint for open meeting law or all this other stuff, or them not following? Who would go after that? And what would be the process, besides the receivership part?
So, I think there are a few different pieces. I think the open meeting law, I believe, is now administered centrally by the Attorney General. There's a division within her office that does open meeting law. Public records is administered by the Secretary of State. I think the issue about the appointment process, which I put the uncertainty, and I spent a fair amount of time on that, and I think the statute gives an idea of what should happen. There's also a practice that was happening. I think that's an element of a lawsuit that's active. I think other people could bring an action, but I'm not sure that if somebody is in a government position, that they're necessarily thinking that they're gonna take that action, who's gonna fund that. So, you know, I'm not speaking for someone, but if I was on the side that I didn't think was right, I think you probably have to weigh, how all in are you to make that argument? Is it, you know, is it worth continuing to bring it up at the meeting? Maybe. Is it worth it to get counsel? You know, I'm not sure.
But I'm confused as to why it should be a lawsuit. Why, when it says a certain thing, if that's not followed, why do we need a lawsuit to rectify that?
I think what I would do in the immediacy is, you know, that is an agency that has counsel, and I would imagine that, you know, whomever is counsel to that agency is advising the agency, and.
But the agency can't keep counsel.
I'm sorry?
They can't keep employees, they can't
Well,
keep
I mean,
counsel.
they've had acting counsel, they've had permanent counsel, they have acting counsel, and I think those kinds of things, at least at some point, counsel would weigh in, and so I don't wanna subject, you know, my piece, I don't have all the facts of sort of where it is, but, I imagine that, you know, that's a voice that's in that conversation.
So do you have, or did you provide, and I missed it, you know, like all the emails or any correspondence you had with commissioners or members of the commission or the executive director asking for information, and them telling you or sending back an email that you're not getting it?
I did not provide all that. What I did say was that any of the citations or any of the pieces that are primary for my testimony, we are going to share. We identified them through footnotes. We're going to send another document so that it's easy to link to them.
Okay.
What was shared, which you may not have, is that the acting, in response to my June 18th letter, the acting chair sent a letter to the legislature and others. And with that, she put some attachments, and she also made some representations about our investigation. And so if one were to look at those letters, you'd get an idea of some of the back and forth.
Okay.
It's not something right now that I would produce right now.
And then just one more quick question, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, I've had my many issues with the Cannabis Control Commission over the last few years, mostly revolving around the former executive director. As far as retaliatory stuff and complaints of bullying inspectors, many different complaints, as Senator Mike Moore had also said in the past, and I'm sure many of my other colleagues have. I had one that took almost 2 years to get a final inspection to open, almost put these poor people out of business. And there are many other stories like that. Have you seen these timelines getting shorter for inspections or enforcement orders or any decisions? Because we're just going to put them out of business before they can get finalized in business. So is the times getting shorter for inspections or stuff like that? Or are they still years or spread out that far?
I appreciate the question, and I would say that.
Or if you came across that, I don't know if you came
You know,
across
I
that.
mean, what I would say is that I prefer to keep today's comments more about the governance, but I will say, like all of you, I imagine complaints, comments, other things that we've heard are in those same kind of vein about how long things take and what the financial impact is. Things like having to pull the storefront because the rules are so difficult as to where you can cite these things, that when you find a location, you might have to then lease the property, and you could be doing that for, you know, it's certainly more than a year, you know, sometimes 2 years. So I think what I would say is, like you, we hear those kinds of things. You know, I don't think that should be, but I'm not prepared to formally
Okay.
weigh in.
I just didn't know if you had looked into that.
But we hear lots, and I imagine, you know, from when we have a hearing like this, when my letter went out, we hear from more people.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Chan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, and thank you, IG. Would increasing oversight through the executive branch help with CCC governance?
I'm sorry?
Would increasing the oversight through the executive branch be helpful to CCC governance?
I mean, I feel like there's a lot of oversight agencies, so I don't know. I mean, there's certainly legislation that would create a statutory unit, And if the legislature was inclined, we have other statutory units. So, if that was a direction, we'd certainly, be happy to talk about that, or if it were enacted, we would be, we would take that direction. We've done that with oversight of the state police. We've done that with the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. We have a statutory division, and we have a division with the MBTA and MassDOT. So if there was more, that could be. I think that my presence here shows that under 12A, I take the broad responsibilities very seriously, and I regularly talk with our folks about what subject matters are we not covered, because I think the more that there are statutory requirements, the more we just have to allocate our resources. But we also have responsibility for every state agency that doesn't fall into that subject matter, or every vendor, supplier, contractor, or nonprofit. So it's an allocation. But I certainly respect that from time to time, this legislative body has made the determination that they certainly want us to focus on things. So if it were a direction they wanted to go, we would certainly take that responsibility. On the other side, I think, as you can see, I'm in this space, and I'm trying to do that. So having more of that authority, I think I have the authority.
Oh,
Respectfully,
okay.
yeah.
I do appreciate how much you focused on the signatory authority, particularly over payroll. Does this commission need a chief auditor to be embedded in it?
I don't know that that's the problem. I mean, I do think that, and I respect the comments that others have said about sort of where it is. I think it really has to do with who's driving, the roles of the executive director, how the executive director works with both the chair and the broader commission. Mm-hmm. So I do think that, it would be, I think, probably premature to suggest as to how they are. I mean, I believe they have a chief financial and accounting officer. That's sort of one role. Some places they don't identify it as such. They do have reporting to the comptroller, and the auditor certainly has the responsibility and opportunity to go in there. So I don't know as an agency of that size that they need that special function. There are some agencies within state government that have a pretty specific accounting. I'm not sure that I would say that they're of that scope yet.
And my final question is, do you have ideas about the chair and the roles and responsibilities a chair should have in the existing commission? That seems to me the most ambiguous of all the roles.
The most immediate, I'm sorry.
The chair
Yeah.
seems to be the most ambiguous of all the roles as defined by the statute. And I just wondered if you had some thoughts for us about what the chair of this commission ought to be assigned.
Sure. No, I think I appreciate the question. I just, in the room, it's sometimes the audio, the acoustics is a little bit tough.
Sure.
I think that you can look to other examples of where it is. I think part of it is driving the overall agenda. I think in some instances, it's a conduit to the executive director. In some ways, while recognizing that the commission as a whole hires the executive director, I do think there's some way that there's a thought partner that could be another senior executive, and being mindful of the limitations of serial conversation and those kinds of things. I do think that when it works well, that there's some synergy that can go there, and also the many kinds of things that take the day-to-day. It does seem like in the example of the Gaming Commission, they've made it work. But I do feel like they could also not make it work, and some of that's could be personality driven. So I think that you can either strengthen what the role of the chair, or clarify it, or on the other side, I think you can clarify what is meant by the roles of the executive director. And respectfully, I'd also say, while there are many, and we've looked fairly extensively at the designated roles of what the executive director is given by the commission, I would say in many instances, the executive director is empowered to do certain things, but even some of them, they then have to bring it back to the chair or to the commission as a whole. And I think some of those things, by doing that, there are certain things that are high level that I certainly, as an executive leader of an agency, I want to know. But if there's everything that goes on that I used to know when I was a chief operating officer, we would never be able to move forward as an agency. And I do think those are the kinds of things, in my experience, that 30-plus years in government, that I see that are the things that trip up, if that is helpful.
It is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And Representative Cruz, who's on the call, there he is, has a question. So, Representative Cruz?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership and for putting together this hearing. Just want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues about the level of diligence and review that this particular committee is engaged in under your leadership and certainly under Chair Gomez's as well. Always appreciate the opportunities to talk to you directly about these issues, and this is an opportunity for the public to hear about an issue that certainly resonates with a lot of different stakeholders. And Inspector General, before I jump into my statement of a comment and then a question, I do want to just express my gratitude to you for the work that you and your staff have done to bring some of these issues forward. And I think I'm going to posit my remarks in a specific way. In my review of instances in which the Commonwealth at the local level has put an agency, a school district, or a department into receivership, I'm a local official as well, so governance is the space that I live in. These have primarily occurred in communities that are low income and that are communities of color, Black, Latino, being the more prevalent populations. And the challenge that I proposed structure is that we're talking about an industry that we have to approach with some level of sensitivity, given that half of our charge in the statute is also around social equity, and many of the folks that we've been trying to bring into the industry are those that have been disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs. And I understand that you've mentioned a couple of ideas of some regular reporting intervals that could come back to the legislature, et cetera. But this issue of like a hierarchical reporting structure to a sole receiver, the sensitivity that I would just relay is that we have to consider the equity of access to that receiver as well, and the lens of an individual that's enumerated with those particular responsibilities when it comes to how to thoughtfully address social equity within the industry. So I do think the standard to which you evaluate the effectiveness of a potential receiver is super important. And I see that on the school district side. When you have a strong rubric for how you evaluate, set goals, have a standard in governance, it creates better outcomes because you're not going off of personalities, you're going off of what's happening operationally within your agency, district, or your governance board. But I guess my question to you would be, what, if any, safeguards do you envision would need to be in place in the event that there was a potential sole receiver that could effectively address any concerns around their responsibilities when it comes to potential discrimination, management of social equity licenses, hiring practices, taking urgent action around some of the economic disparities within the industry, and then those routine reviews of regulations and committee decisions. I think knowing what those safeguards would be when you have a chief administrative officer that would be given the powers of receiver are super important because, again, if they come in with a lens where they don't really understand the charge of social equity, their focus is going to be on kind of the minutia of running an agency rather than that other side of the coin and the goal of trying to ensure that we're creating equity of access for those that have been disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs.
Thank you, Representative. I very much appreciate your question and your concern. The history and the basis for what the commission, or one of the factors that the commission is trying to do, which is to certainly address the social inequities that the war on drugs and other government policies have had on certain communities, is exactly the reason that I raised this issue, because I do believe that the delay in time that it takes to license facilities, adjudicate enforcement actions, and do other kinds of commission-related work to help the industry, to help those that are trying to be entrepreneurs and enter it, those that are licensees, those that are making loans to these businesses, and to ensure that there's capital that has to be state capital or personal or family capital, in essence, because the federal government still doesn't recognize cannabis as a legitimate legal business, so that creates other obstacles. So it's for many of the reasons that you raise that I actually think that a receiver is necessary. And to be very clear, I think that the issues around public policy, regulation, determining licensees and those types of things, those would continue to be the responsibility of the commissioners in a public setting. What I look at for the receiver is that that would be an individual that would ensure that the operational side of the organization is working effectively. I do think that there can be, that individual can have impact. Why does it take 2 years to review a license application or some significant amount of time like that, that requires a small entrepreneur that's trying to get into this business to hold a retail space, because it's so hard to cite these, as I mentioned before, that when you find a spot that is in the right zoning and is the right distance from whatever you can't be near, you need to lock it up and hold on to it, and these individuals can be paying rent for certainly more than a year. I've heard, sometimes 2 years. And maybe more. So I think that having a receiver that is going to ensure that the operations and not the policy are moving on a more regular, expedited basis, I do think would serve the mission that the commission has been charged with, and would address the issues. As to how this individual would be measured, I think there are metrics, and certainly the legislature, in creating the position, could put some of those elements out there, and also could clarify what would belong with the commissioners. But I think many of the items that you raise, I don't view this as the receiver is going to run the whole agency and be, in lieu of the commission. And I was very clear in my testimony and in my letter, I believe, to distinguish that that's not what I was suggesting. But I do think that the receiver would certainly serve as the chief administrative, chief operating officer, so that in at least this period of time, that person would take the role that one would have thought the executive director would have. Does that mean that the agency shouldn't or can't hire an executive director? I think they probably could, and in some way that person could, possibly be mentored and trained by a receiver. And it would also help, fill some of the staffing vacancies. But I'm very sensitive to the concerns that you raised, and ensuring that the commission lives up to those ideals, which is part of the reason that I think that the time is urgent, and the time is timely, and the time is now to give some stability, because it's all of those individuals and all of those communities that we have this obligation to. I mean, if something isn't done, the fear that I have is that we will continue down a path that's inconsistent and unstable. And I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Inspector General, and appreciate that. And I would just clarify that I understand that what you're proposing doesn't really touch on the commission side in terms of the receiver responsibilities. I think even in the operations, that social equity piece exists, and I just wonder about a shared power model rather than, even on the administrative side, rather than those responsibilities falling into just the hands of a chief executive officer. I just have general concerns of that type of hierarchical structure rather than a shared power or a flatter kind of executive leadership on the administrative side. But I certainly appreciate your response, and you did capture some of the other elements that I was hoping to hear, so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Representative. And I certainly would be open to other ideas, and ultimately, it's the legislator, this committee, your colleagues, and the leadership that will ultimately decide, if anything were to be done. And certainly, the model that I suggest isn't the only model. If there's a power sharing or there's some other kind of piece, I think that that should be considered. The caution that I just have is the problem that we have before us is some kind of a model that, if it worked well, maybe it would be more of a power sharing. If it doesn't, it's created a lot of lack of clarity and uncertainty, and it's been over a course of different people holding those roles. So in some way, I think it's, that's indicative or evidence that it's about the roles and less about the people. So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions? Any else? Yeah. Priscilla, let's let her. Yeah. Representative Sousa? No, we need more microphones.
It's a long extension cord. Thank you so much. Thank you for your testimony today, for all your work on this and all the work that you do for the people of the Commonwealth. I just had 3 quick clarifying questions on the receivership process. You indicated receivership would most likely be one individual receiver. And I was just wondering if there are any thoughts to who would be appointed this receiver, where that person entity would come from, and given this is a unique situation, why a unique receiver, not something like a control board?
Sure, thank you for the questions. What I would say is that there is a mature, experienced profession of people that do receivership work. I don't view myself as having any role in this. That being said, our office and others have heard from many people that are certainly interested in this. My, thought in this is likely that if this were a direction to be pursued, there would be a process for an appointment, presumably a more refined process than some of the other pieces, so that it can happen fairly quickly. Maybe it belongs to the governor, maybe it belongs in some other place, but I think how it gets appointed and what the criteria, that could be developed. But there are many people and companies that do this kind of work that are very experienced in it. So I think that there's not a lack of qualified people that would know and be able to do this fairly quickly. I think how the reporting and what information the legislature would want as the receiver continues certainly is something that could, you could certainly control as you put this together. The reason that I think a receiver as opposed to a control board, I think part of the concern right now is a timing piece. I think that in the example that I gave of the MBTA, they put a finance board. It was going to be a long-time solution. I think that the idea of a control board, that may be something that the legislature, as it spends more time to look at what a governance in the future could look like, it may be a factor to consider. But I think that part of what we were thinking about is that we were trying to give some timely and immediate stability and a message to the industry, to the participants, and I think creating that kind of structure and how that would work felt like that was going to be even more complex to implement in the time period.
Thank you. And I know we talked a little bit about the ambiguity of a timeline. We really, given the lack of transparency, we really won't know what there is to do until it's kind of cracked open under this process. So, but is there a rough anticipated time frame for receivership? Are there factors that you see that impacting this beyond the work of this legislature? And I ask this because one of the things that was mentioned in your testimony was the mediator, and how over 16 months there's been upwards of $160,000 paid. And you look at the model in the Chelsea Housing Authority, they were essentially what was being paid out was about $20,000 a month during the process of receivership, and that was only 4 months' time. So is there a projected timeline, or just a rough based on your experience?
I mean, I think part of it is what the objective is, and I think that any legislation that were designed to appoint a receiver could certainly address that, whether it's milestones or time. I mean, I do think that there would be a reasonable amount of time to be able to put somebody in place and allow, him, her, or they to get their sort of arms around the agency, understand, get some stability. But I do think that it will take a little time to then figure out if there need to be changes or respectfully, if it's, the appointing authorities need to do something else, as representatives, suggested another option. So I think there's a time piece of it. I am as mindful of the public dollars, and you've seen both today I questioned the expenditure of the $160,000 and suggested that that's not the value of that is not measured against the revenue that the agency generates, nor on the size of the budget. It's evaluated dollar for dollar for what the cost and what the expense is. And I think many of the municipalities, I'm the only inspector general in the country that also has municipal authority and responsibility. And for those that live in the small towns of this Commonwealth that know that I don't look at the dollar threshold, because that's what's important to someone in a smaller community, maybe in the margins in a larger community. That's not how we operate, and that's not how we think. So I give you that background because I don't really know. I mean, there are plenty of people out there we can figure out what the rate is and how these things are budgeted. But I think it's a lot more about what's the potential of this agency. And it's $7 billion at an agency that had its birth in 2017, and here we are at 2024. Is that a good number or a bad number? I'm not prepared to answer that, but I do think that we would value what the cost of this is on the potential of the agency and what we need to do based on how it's operating today.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And one third question, clarifying question, and I imagine this was probably covered, but just to clarify for my sake, while there's an ongoing process to hire an executive director, and you mentioned in your testimony the role of commissioners under receivership, what would be the role of the newly hired executive director under receivership?
I think that part of that, I think, would be determined on how the receivership piece is. I mean, there's a statute that this executive director, it's a position that's open that they're interviewing for, as I understand. I'm not in a position to say not to hire somebody. I do think that what's in the public discourse of how the agency has been and what the turnover is, that's for candidates to decide if that's a place that they want to potentially be employed, is one piece. The other part that I think is far more important is to think that future results are going to be different than the past pattern. That's an opinion, but I'm not sure. People always say that the past is a pretty good predictor of the future. So without making change, I'm not sure how that next executive director is going to be the success that one maybe would hope. But I think it's up to the commission now to decide what they do on their staffing, and I'm not here today to say to stop that or to freeze any other piece. And I also say that if they hire somebody as an executive director and this came in, I think there could be a complement. I think it would be clear that the receiver is designed and put in place to do a certain function for a certain period of time. But I actually think that having those two positions at the same time wouldn't add any more complication. So.
Thank you so much for clarifying.
Thank you, Representative.
Any other questions?
I have one follow-up question.
Yeah, one follow-up.
Both my colleagues, the vice chair and then immediately after, the part that I'm coming back to that I'm a little bit, the receivership thing that I have an issue with, it is a very big option. In the current legislation, the executive director serves at the mercy of the commission. Is it fair to say, in your assessment, or why didn't you maybe in your assessment, give us an option that changes had to be made? I mean, I'm a big firm believer that, with great power comes great responsibility, and if you want to have that power, you have to take ownership of it, good or bad, and if you do, the buck stops with you. So why not make the recommendations of the acting chair or changing that position and giving us some recommendations at that level? Because it just seems very clear that executive director can be removed fairly easily if they wanted to be. But why we wouldn't take those actions? It just seems like in your investigation, in your report, there seems to be even more problems from when all of this nonsense started with acting director, removal of the current chair and all this, and acting chair, current chair, removal of the chair, this appointed person was supposed to be chair, et cetera. How come in your recommendation, maybe you didn't make that recommendation to us as a committee to say, I know that maybe we have limited power or scope, but maybe we could, in appointing those positions, but maybe we could make those recommendations, or it would give the executive body, or it would give the constitutional officers some guidance on what they should do to help in this process instead of us just going to receivership.
Sure. I appreciate those questions. They're great questions, and I think there are two of them. The first one I would say is that while the commissioners have the ability to remove the executive director, as I shared before, and I respectfully say, it's a numbers game, and right now there are 4 commissioners, one's on leave, so you know, to be able to do that, you need a certain number to feel that way.
But, Inspector, I don't want to interrupt, but September 13th, the commissioner on leave, under the legislative guidance, sent an email appointing another commissioner in what I feel is very clear in the law to do. How come that didn't happen? If you're saying that's the case, then what did they feel the need that they should have been able to use the numbers, as you say, to make and overrule that law that we have discussed?
No, I appreciate the question, and I respectfully refer that question to either the commission's acting general counsel or general counsel. I think the acting general counsel might have even been the acting general counsel at that time. But in that meeting on the 13th, there are minutes that sort of go through the process, and my recollection from that is that there was a view that came from there that that was the appropriate course that they took was the appropriate course.
So your recommendation then is that you felt like you didn't have, that couldn't have been a recommendation that you could have made to this or made in your original findings or initial findings as a step 1, I would do this, step 2, I would do this, step 3, okay, nuclear option, receivership.
Well, I know I respect that. I felt like there's a lot of back and forth on who's in charge of that, and I did feel that the underlying issue, even if that were the case, from having seen other chairs at different times, and not making this personal, but I didn't feel that the agency, when there was another chair who was there for a long time, that it was better. So if there was clarity on somebody else being the chair, I was not convinced that that would ultimately be the solution that was necessary. And we still have, you know, some uncertainty as to why another chair left early and quite abruptly, moments after what appeared to be a goal that chair set of putting in this mediation. You know, it was something that the commission was discussing. 6 days, I think, after the contract was signed, that person left. So to go back to that, I didn't feel like would solve the problem. It might give clarity as to what the succession process is, but I thought it was a little bit different. And then the other piece about sort of changing or suggesting to the appointing authorities about making a change, I think one of the pieces is that each one of those appointing authorities has a particular purpose of why they're appointing the appointee that they do. And I would suggest that some of these kinds of operational administrative things, you know, nobody owns that space. They own all kinds of other things that are in their purview. Some of them are on the social justice and the economic opportunity that we talked about. Some of them have to do with cannabis and health and public health kinds of issues. So all 5 of the commissioners are appointed for different experiences, and I'm not suggesting one way or another if they meet those pieces, but some of these pieces are sort of just general governance, administration and finance and operations. And I would say that, you know, it's not, you know, I'm not sure that I could say that the person that's the public health person should be removed because they might be the greatest public health person. You know, that's not what I'm here to talk about, but I'm saying it doesn't function operationally, and that's the purview that I'm in when I see that this agency isn't doing what it can do, and I do have concerns about its structure and how it's operating relative to what my statute is.
Well, I just want to commend you, thank you again for your very thorough report. I think you enlightened, I think, the public on this issue. I think you're an independent organization, independent government agency that doing your job is exactly what we expected of your office. And I think I'm going to echo again, there has to be some major changes and things have to happen. So I'm glad that you brought this to our attention. So thank you again, Inspector General. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that.
And thank you again, Mr. Chair, and to your staff also, for everything you've done.
Thank you, Representative. Oh, you'll bear with us. One more question, Representative Howard?
One more question. It's going to be a quick one. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you, IG Shapiro, for your testimony. Speaking of structure, I just want to go back to your testimony earlier. It's just more of a clarification. You said that this is not about the people, but it's about the structure. And the governance structure needs to be fixed, that it's going to take time, and there are a variety of opinions as to what needs to happen. However, day to day, there is an industry that is relying on this commission, and there are over 100 employees that work for the agency, and those people need to know who is in charge. Right now, some things are done by the acting executive director. Some things are done by the commission as a whole. Some appear to be done by the acting chair. And I continue with your testimony. And if I am an employee who works there, it is very unclear to me to whom I report and from whom I take direction. This is simply unacceptable and adds to the turnover and many impact the ability to effectively recruit and hire in your testimony. So, Chapter 55 of the Acts of 2017, which amended Section 76 of Chapter 10 of the Massachusetts General Laws, define the roles of the chair and the executive director of the CCC in the following terms. Chair shall have and exercise supervision and control over all the affairs of the commission. Executive director shall be the executive and administrative head of the commission and shall be responsible for administering and enforcing the law relative to the commission and to each administrative unit thereof. So the roles defined there for the chair and the executive director. In your investigation, your finding, so there are 100 employees. In your finding, how many turnovers? You said there are turnovers because employees were not clear, very unclear on who to report to and what the roles are of the chair and the executive director on the CCC.
I can't give you specifics on what the turnover is that's related to the lack of clarity. I don't have that information with me, and I don't know that we have that. I do know that there is significant turnover in the agency. There are major positions that have had turnover. What I can say is there are examples of who makes a determination, and I mean a very basic example I would think that I hope proves the point is who gets to decide if it's a hybrid agency or if it's an in-person agency. This is an agency that has 2 space leases that are quite expensive. It's a pretty hybrid agency. Is that allowed? What if there's conflict as to what the chair wants and what the executive director does? Who gets to decide that? And I do think that's, not hypothetical.
Thank you. As the chair mentioned earlier, this is a unique spot that we're in. We never had been asked to weigh in on something like this before. And so that clarity that we wanted to make sure that, because the roles that define here as the chair and the executive are clearly defined. So I just wanted that clarification of the turnovers and what was very unclear from the employees on the CCC.
I appreciate the question, and I shared what I was able to in my testimony. I think I delineate some of the turnover, some of the vacant positions. I also suggest in there that we were looking for further information on that. Mm-hmm. That may be coming. I don't know. Maybe after today. I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And I think that's it for questions from the committee. I just want to first thank members of the committee for your attendance and for your well-thought-out questions and the well-thought-out conversation I think that happened here. It's always a privilege. I think this committee on the House is really puts the time and the work into it and the energy, as you can see from your attendance today and from your thoughtful conversations. And I want to thank you, Inspector General, for both your letter. I think you've highlighted some serious concerns around internal and even external accountability with the CCC. That is certainly going to be part of this committee's deliberations in the coming weeks. So appreciate your time, and our understanding is your investigation is not over, and if there are further recommendations or further communications, the committee would be welcome to that. And one final to those who might be out is we are accepting written testimony as well, so we'll make sure that that's distributed directly to all the committee members, and ensure that any committee members that were in attendance today will make sure that they have your documents that you provided as well. So, seeing any other questions, I think motion to close the hearing. All right, so move. Close the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.